all the descendants of ancestors who learned to survive in what was a very challenging and potentially dangerous environment. Although we might not feel it, we're very, very good at unconsciously scanning for risks and scanning for stuff that could go wrong. Like imposter syndrome, right? That's another way of protecting ourselves from that kind of risk. So there's all kinds of unconscious mechanisms that try and keep us safe from that kind of stuff.
You're listening to the Bookkeepers Podcast, sponsored by Xero.
I use Xero's accounting and bookkeeping software to manage my clients' accounts, and I love it. If you haven't tried it yet, head over to xero.com with an X, and you can either start a free 30-day trial or sign up to Xero's partner program to join their amazing community of forward-thinking accountants and bookkeepers.
Hi, and welcome to the Bookkeepers Podcast. I'm Zoe Whitman. I'm here with Joe Wood, and we're joined by Nick Robinson today. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Hello. Really nice to see you. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to have you here. We got in touch with you, Nick, after Accountex Manchester, I think, and we'd heard your presentation about the sort of people side of business, and we thought this is a conversation we need to have in the community. So we're going to talk about managing difficult relationships in business, which might be with your team, it might be with clients. But I wonder if we can start, Nick, with a bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm an executive coach, and I actually just celebrated 25 years of being a professional coach. So it just feels like forever, that I've been doing that. Before that, I did have I said to you earlier, I had a proper job for quite a while. So this is kind of like my third career. So I grew up in industry. I had roles in operations and management and finance, and later in corporate strategy. And I had one really interesting job in personnel where I was head of discipline, which is a kind of, so you can see a track through to my kind of working with difficult people. And then I left that to set up a consultancy business. The consultancy worked really well. Made enough money out of that to think about what I really want to be doing. And I realized I'd loved the whole kind of coaching as a leadership style, bringing out the best in other people was my thing. So I decided I'm going to do that. And that was more or less like 25 years ago last month. And
Wow.
I've been coaching ever since. And last 14 or 15 years have been my speciality about difficult people and tough teams. And I can't see the end to it yet. It's the closest I've ever got to thinking like this is the thing I was here to do.
That's amazing. And Nick, you said you qualified as an accountant at some point in that.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, when I had a spell working in finance, actually I worked for the post office at the time, so I was in finance at the post office.
Wow.
And I qualified. I'm ACCA, so by the time I gave up my ACCA. It was only about maybe 15 years ago when I couldn't keep up with the CPD for being a proper accountant. ACCA is really flexible. So the coaching CPD I was doing would have counted towards being an accountant because their definition is anything that contributes to your profession. But I just kind of felt it wasn't really fair to keep calling myself an accountant whilst I wasn't doing any learning about it. So I resigned my membership about 15 years ago.
It's so interesting. Like we were just talking beforehand about the fact that, we are taught a certain set of skills when we are learning how to be a qualified bookkeeper or accountant. And we feel that should be enough to be able to run a business. It very much felt like that to me. I thought if somebody had the title accountant, they understood business. But actually, what we realise when we go out into the world on our own as self-employed or start having conversations around that boardroom table with leaders, that actually we know a very small amount about it. And actually, you're not taught, what we're talking about today is the people side. That's without the sales side, the marketing side, the pricing side, the legal side, the IT side. There is so many areas that we're not taught, but we are kind of given this we are an accountant. Wow, you must know everything about business. But it's really wrong. And we're definitely not taught these people skills, but they're fundamental to building any business. What kind of things are the things that you see people struggle with the most when it comes to managing relationships?
Well, yeah, there's a lot, but you know what? One thing really came up for me as you were talking there, Joe, which was being a newly qualified accountant, and I'm presenting a paper to our board, and I thought the paper was really good, like it really stacked up. There were graphs and everything, like bullet points, everything was there, and I'm presenting it to the board, and I could see some people around the table going, "Oh yeah, like this is exactly it." And I've looked over, and there's the marketing director and the HR director, and they are just not getting it. They're really not buying it. And as a young accountant, I couldn't understand what it was that they couldn't get about my really good board paper and the perfectly logical argument. And I think that was probably the first time that I realized, oh, like there's a whole lot more to this stuff than just like getting the numbers right and making the logical argument. So you mentioned about selling, Joe, but persuasion and influencing other people, that's a massive part of it. And I think as a bookkeeper as well, we can say to clients, this is the right way to do it. This is what the outcome is when you've done it, and they still don't necessarily believe you or like it. So you almost have to like sell or influence every major step. So that was one thing that came up for me a lot, and I think that comes up for other professionals a lot.
Yeah, and that can be quite an intimidating place to be as well and I know, thinking about a bookkeeper, because when you're selling to a prospect as well, you are trying to persuade them. If they don't see it themselves, often you're trying to persuade them that they need something beyond the compliance, because that's bookkeeper's bread and butter. And if you're in that situation where someone's saying, I don't need that, I know everything, and you're like, but hang on a minute, I'm the expert here and I've done all this training, you don't know what to do with that. So how would you handle, like in that situation, what did you learn about how to manage the relationship with people who, I guess, aren't coming to the table with the same background and knowledge as you, and feeling okay to share your viewpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zoe. So where I am as a coach now, so my speciality is in people that other people tend to find a bit difficult, or with people who are finding others difficult to work with. So often I'm like one-to-one with someone who doesn't really want to be there, and they don't really want to hear what's being said to them, and they definitely don't want to change anything. So you have to kind of get under the skin of what's going on there, and there's often maybe three or four things that are happening. Firstly, people are really afraid. And I think even as someone hiring a bookkeeper, that's a big decision, and you have to trust them with your business, and you might be frightened about how successful your business is doing, or whether or not you'll be out of control over your business. So getting under the things that might frighten people is often like a really important first step, I think. And mostly people don't know they're frightened about stuff. They don't know that they're automatically reacting. And in my book, I put those kind of reactions into three groups. People will disconnect and go away and try and do everything by themselves, shut themselves in a dark room and try and do it. And as a bookkeeper or an accountant, that can be quite difficult to break into. And other people will just try harder and harder and harder. And again, we've had clients like that. No, I'm fine, I can do it. And you know that they're creaking, they're not getting their accounts submitted on time, for example. And other people will have this kind of avoidance strategy where they're just terrified of getting anything wrong. And again, as professional people helping other people, that's really something to cope with. So my first step is always like, be mindful of the fact that other people have probably got quite a lot of unconscious fears going on, and try and ameliorate those fears for them somehow.
I think something that I've learned through like growing as a leader, business owner, is learning and trying to figure out where I need to take accountability for things, because naturally we all think we're doing the best with the situations that we're in. And something I've learned recently by working with a coach and things is that, and I've had to keep doing it because I keep falling back into the pattern where I create victims because I want to rescue everybody. And I've learned that you said about that triangle of people, the 3 different types. So, but when you have a rescuer and you have a victim, then someone needs to be a villain as well. Like there's this story playbook happening. And so for me, I think I'm being really nice by rescuing people, and it's coming from a good place. And I can't understand why people are a bit peed off with me, but it's because I'm putting them into a victim, and then someone becomes the villain, and it tends to be me again. I end up becoming so, and I love this whole. But the biggest thing I've realized is to stop in a situation and go, okay, so how have I created this? If I'm feeling uncomfortable in a situation, how have I contributed to this? Whereas when I was running business, I've got 4 failed, not successful bookkeeping practices behind me before I figured out what I was doing. And in all of those, the main thing was that I wasn't taking accountability, and I just was like, I'm doing the best I can, and everyone else my staff are wrong, my team is wrong, my clients are bad. I didn't look at hold on, where am I accountable here? So do you find that with the conversations you have, that a lot of time it takes like holding up a mirror to somebody and saying, well, hold on, where could there be an issue here? Is that something?
Absolutely, Joe. And often those patterns are actually really hard to see, which is why holding up a mirror can be so useful. And I think there's something maybe kind of, I'm going to kind of jump backwards and forwards a bit, but so the kind of patterns that you're talking about, in your case, being someone who loves to rescue other people, and therefore you have to create a victim and a perpetrator to help them out. And other people, like, they get on really well in a crisis, so you'll often see them manufacturing the crisis so that they can then kind of put it right. Those patterns really kind of get reinforced because we become very good at doing them, and it's a naturally safe place, and we feel very confident if we're in our kind of comfort zone with those. So I'm very familiar. So my pattern tends to be like, I'm really good at working out connections and seeing the big picture of stuff. And I will often start from that position, regardless of whether or not actually it'd be better just to dive in and start doing something more practical. So, and it's just really hard to see those patterns happening. So one great way is, as you were saying, Joe, is to work with a coach, to have someone who can hold a mirror up to you. But I don't know what your experience is like, but it can actually be quite painful to have the mirror held up. Kind of, did you find that?
Oh, absolutely. I was like, yeah, it's very difficult because I also think I'm a people pleaser. So to think that what I'm doing with what I feel is like heart-led, like care and love, I think it's coming from a place of love, to then be told you're hurting people with that love, hurt me back, because I'm like, that was not my intention. And so it is really uncomfortable. And you're right, I have got into that where I started creating those victims so I could rescue, because I'm obviously getting some dopamine and a good feeling. But actually, when I've done it and it's ended up in pain, I'm like, oh my God, that was not my intention, but I'd created it. So it's really tough. Yeah, really tough. So you've had the same.
I'm just thinking about what you said about creating the crisis. Like, I literally put a post on LinkedIn last week about being really helpful, like really good in a crisis. That wasn't what I meant, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like we had a conversation in our team today about there's this activity that needs to happen, there's a deadline, and I'm like, great, I know exactly what to do. I do this, and it's a really fast-paced piece of activity, and that suits me because I feel like I'm a fast, productive doer in that situation. Whereas if you said to me, right, you've got 3 weeks and I need you to do these 4 things, I'll be like, I'll be all right. So and I think then, because I maybe have that attitude, I create a crisis at the end because I won't have done the thing in the 3 weeks leading up. So that was a mirror held up to me just from you saying that, and it does feel uncomfortable to have that, and then you kick yourself about it, don't you? You're like, why am I doing that? Why am I creating this? But I think it's in human nature that we all have different styles and preferred environments, and we will go back to, and we've talked to someone in our team this morning actually about a success she'd had, a really brilliant success, and yet her not wanting to share it because to her that brings up, like, what does that mean about, what does success mean for her? Well, in the past, success has meant for her something bad happens, and it's happened a few times, so she's expecting that pattern. And I don't think we will do this reflective. Well, obviously we're very lucky that we're in this space where we're being coached and we're coaching all the time, but we don't often look into those things around us and our backgrounds and our circumstances because it's hard.
Isn't it? Yeah, isn't it? And that, Zoe, that was such a great example. And for me, that brought up a couple of things which I think are really important. And one is that you said about kicking yourself for discovering that, and one is to learn to not do that self-kicking, because it's such a great strength. You know, the energy you described and the passion you described for sorting stuff out like that. Like in no way is that never a great thing. It's a fantastic thing to have that skill. And you know, it just comes at a price. So there are times when that isn't the best approach. And so I think one of our big lessons is to learn, like, all of our strengths have a kind of a flip side. You know, you can do a 180 on them, and you can see, like, in the wrong circumstances, that is absolutely the wrong thing to be doing. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing or that it's not a good strength when it is at the right time to be using it. It's just other times we need to do stuff differently. And if we're kicking ourselves about the bad times, that leads to a kind of real cycle of, like, oh, you know what, like, I'm never going to do anything different again because it's just so painful. So all I'm going to do now is look for situations where I can be the crisis solver, and I'm just going to never do anything else. Which of course is, like, daft, because that really restricts our scope. That really restricts our scope as human beings and restricts our scope as professionals. So a better way is to do it. Oh, you know what? Like, I did that thing. It didn't work in that circumstance. I wonder if there's a different way of doing stuff if I'm in a similar circumstance in future, and just get really curious about it and be really flexible. I'll learn something else that in those circumstances could be better. And whatever you do, don't do the beating up thing, because it really doesn't help. It just reinforces it.
It's so interesting because I said these words yesterday, that because we are in this space, I think I'm getting better at recognizing or feeling when something's feeling off, being that curious thing, going, wonder what's going on there. And something that's coming up is we're off to Canada to Accountex, which is so exciting. And we and I said, sorry, I'm just not feeling excited like I thought I was going to be excited. And this is not, I don't get it. Anyway, I was having a conversation with somebody and I said, we flew for business to New York earlier in the year, and it hit me. And I was like, when I landed from New York, my daughter was in hospital with appendicitis and I had to run to A&E, and she was seriously unwell. So no wonder my subconscious is going, you're getting on a plane again. You're going away. You're leaving your family. What if someone's ill again and you aren't there? But I did that thing, Nick. I kicked myself and went, why didn't you think of that? But actually, I should be really proud of the fact that, and my best friend actually said to me, well done for figuring it out and realizing, because I was like, am I scared of the flight? No, I'm not. I am a bit scared, but I'm used to traveling. And I was trying to figure it out. And it was only by talking to someone else I'd realized. And it's so interesting how our subconscious is trying to keep us safe. And we don't realize the power of that, because of course I'm excited to go to Canada. What an amazing opportunity, but my heart wasn't in it. And I'm like, what's going on? And when I can see it in black and white, of course, you're human. Your body's going, what if something? And now I've spoken to my husband and I've been able to talk about it. He's like, everyone's fit, everyone's well. She only had one appendix. That's gone. You know, all of those things. So I think we don't give our brains and previous experiences that have imprinted in us enough. We don't realize that we're in self-preservation mode a lot. And that's what our team member this morning was. She's self-preserving because she's like, well, my experience is when there's success, then there's a fall. So, and she even said, I've got really great at being not successful. And we were like, oh, wow, we need some help here. But we're just in self-preservation mode, aren't we?
Hey, it's Zoe here. I just wanted to check in and see whether you have joined our free Facebook community yet. It's called the Six Figure Bookkeepers Club. It's our free community on Facebook, and it's a great place to go and connect with other bookkeepers, ask questions, and hear about best practice in the industry. Come and join us by going to sixfigurebookkeeper.club. It will take you straight to the Facebook group, and we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of putting it. First, really glad to hear that your daughter is okay. And
She's good.
yeah, and another great insight, Joe. Our bodies and our unconscious minds carry around the memories of stuff where we've been hurt or potentially at risk. And we're all, like I heard once, like we're all the descendants of ancestors who learned to survive in what was a very challenging and potentially dangerous environment. So although we might not feel it, we're very, very good at unconsciously scanning for risks and scanning for stuff that could go wrong. And in fact, like if you research it, it's fascinating because there's a whole kind of series of patterns around like imposter syndrome, right? That comes up a lot for us as professionals, that sense that we don't really know what we're doing and we're going to get found out. That's another way of protecting ourselves from that kind of risk. Protecting ourselves from the danger of looking like an idiot professionally, which is like a massive thing if you're a professional, you end up looking like an idiot. So there's all kinds of unconscious mechanisms that try and keep us safe from that kind of stuff. And again, it's like the things you're talking about, Zoe and Joe, recognizing the patterns of those are really important. And the thing I would add to, like, once you know those patterns is about kindness. So we really do need to be kind with ourselves about this stuff, and I think kind with other people as well. And one of the principles in my book is actually about fierce kindness, I call it, because I think you have to learn to do two potentially opposite things at once, which is be really kind with ourselves about the stuff we're afraid of, the stuff that's trying to protect us from risk, the stuff that we think is a natural limit, when of course it isn't. Like your friend. I got used to not being successful, trying to protect yourself from failure. You kind of really need to kind of get used to those unconscious limits and then be kind with ourselves about it and be kind with other people, but also be quite strict. So it's not enough to go, I'm someone who's I don't like failure, so I'm not going to be successful. It's not enough just to be kind with yourself. You then need to say, okay, I know that, I'm going to move on. And you need to be quite rigid and fierce with yourself and with others about that moving on bit as well, I think. Is that the same for you?
Yeah. And what you've got me thinking about is the other, like one of the big relationships in business that we're often talking about with bookkeepers is the relationship with clients and how we need to be fiercely kind with them, because we've obviously engaged with clients to support them, but often there will be situations where maybe we do feel intimidated or that imposter syndrome, or where we see them as the expert or the guru and we're just the bookkeeper, which totally we have to change. And that can make it quite difficult to manage relationships when you've got someone that you see as a strong character who isn't cooperating or working with you in the way that you kind of expected. And I'd love to ask you about how we get better at the difficult relationships we might have with clients. And a great example is we'll often have conversations with bookkeepers who have had a client who, let's say, doesn't give them the paperwork. They're never on time. They don't care that they're not on time. They don't care. We were talking to someone the other day. Their client was getting fines every month. Client doesn't care. Doesn't matter what they do. The client's happy with that. And that was against their values of like, this is not how I work. And what people will often say to us is, I need to disengage this client. So the client is important to them because it's part of their revenue. Like that, it's a big deal to say to a client, actually, this isn't working. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are on how do we turn that around if we're in that situation, rather than say goodbye to the client. I mean, maybe it's the right thing to do, but how would you look into that situation?
Well, the first thing to say is that, Zoe, that you and Joe you're actually doing with your podcast and the work you do for bookkeepers, my number one thing for anybody who's in that kind of situation, which is to not try and do it all by yourself, like to look for allies. I always say to people, like, goodness sake, like, look for allies. If you're in that situation, you've got a really difficult client, they're missing all the deadlines, they're getting fined for it. Talk to other bookkeepers. Like, what did you do when you had a client like that? What do you recommend? What advice can I take from you? Are there other clients that I could introduce my client to who would say, well, like, come on, that's daft. Stop doing that. Like, do not do this stuff on your own. So I think the Bookkeepers Podcast is a fantastic example of that principle, finding allies. It's really lonely as a professional person, and very, very difficult to try and solve every situation by yourself. So sorry, I'm going on about that because I just think what you're doing is fantastic, and it really is the number one thing I say to people: find allies. Right. And then the second thing is, well, you mentioned it yourself, Zoe. I call it boundaries. It's just like knowing where you draw the line. And I don't think necessarily. I wouldn't want to draw the line for other people. So I wouldn't want to say automatically to a bookkeeper, "Oh, you know what? You should always sack that client," because that might be okay. You might be okay as a bookkeeper. You know, I work with lots of people I call difficult coaching clients, and some of them don't turn up for sessions. Some of them don't do what they said they would do, and because of my niche, you have to kind of get used to that and make sure that someone in their organization is hitting them with a big stick if necessary. Right? But the principle is, define your boundaries. Are you the kind of bookkeeper who really should be sacking off that sort of client, or are you kind of bookkeeper who lives with it, or is there something in the middle? Boundaries are really, really important to make sure other people don't damage us professionally, don't take the mickey out of us, and don't put the blame for their own shortcomings onto us. So that's my second thing, is about boundaries. And then I think the third thing is about, it's said that people don't change until the pain of changing is greater than the pain of staying as they are. So, and I think sometimes as a professional person, one of the things we can do is just like crank up the pain for people. Like, oh, you might be fine, you might be okay getting fined every month now, but those fines are going to escalate if this carries on. And next time you have a cash flow shortage, an HMRC come after you, they're going to get really interested in your track record. And if you need to ask them for time to pay VAT, they're going to look at your track record and go, no, not really, because you're not a very good risk. So sometimes as professionals, I think we do really need to crank up the pain about what are the consequences of your behaviors, so that staying as they are becomes much more painful than changing. I think so. Those three things, maybe, Zoe.
Yeah, I really like that. It is definitely, and everyone's pain threshold is different, isn't it? So we might be, as bookkeepers, going, oh my goodness, they've had a fine. That would make me, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. But their threshold is different. And I think, what you said about boundaries, Zoe and I talk a lot about knowing what our own values are as like individuals, because then we can set boundaries according to our values. And I don't think, this is something else that I didn't do. I just thought I had to provide a service and get treated however I got treated, and hopefully someone would pay me. That's how I set up my initial business. But when I figured out and built a business around my values, I was then in my marketing able to be more open and honest. And then I ended up attracting people with similar values, which, don't get me wrong, people still fell off of the cycle. We used to do weekly bookkeeping and sometimes they get a bit behind. But part of my values was to allow them to come back in at the beginning. And I would then spend more time with them and say, life's happened, you've been sick, child's been sick, whatever it's been, and then allow them to, and give them the space to get back on track. Because I know I'm like that. Sometimes I thought things fall apart in life and therefore there's a lot more receipts to deal with than they should be. And if they were like, oh, wow, thank you, I really appreciate that, then I knew that they were my kind of people. So I think we don't realize that when we build a business, that we get to instill our values in the business. And some people, I know, we spoke to one of our mastermindees and she loves the paperwork. She doesn't want people to be digital. She loves picking up shoe boxes and going through that. And that's her thing, and it makes her happy. And we're like, we'll do that. For me, I couldn't, I've done that for 20 years and I couldn't think of anything worse. picking through people's stuff. But I did it at a time and realized that wasn't my bag, but she's done it and she's like, oh, I love it. So we get to, and this is what the beauty is. This is why we're not in competition with each other. Because if we build businesses that around our values, then no business is ever going to be the same, and our client base is not going to be exactly the same. So I really, really love that. I also wanted to mention something. We had a meetup with some people a couple of weeks ago, and it was talking about imposter syndrome. And we had the best case of this. Okay, so we had this amazing accountant that she's been working with us, and she's spent a long time employed. And we were saying to her about the fact that actually, she was putting herself out there as a bookkeeper, but actually she was amazing at forecasts and budgeting and cash flow. And she'd sat boardroom level talking to the other directors of the business, presenting, and we're like, why are you not going out there as a virtual finance director, a fractional CFO? She's like, oh no, I'm not a finance director. And we're like, okay, interesting. Why is that? Well, I can't call myself that. And we were delving into it. We're saying, but you do realize have you ever presented a report like you were talking and oh yeah, I've done it to massive teams, like they're £1 million businesses and And interesting, I think it was me that said to her, so what was the last title that you held? And her face, it was hilarious. She was, finance transformation director. She, like, the penny dropped. And actually, she messaged me yesterday. She's just engaged with somebody else, and they've sent her over the contract. And she went, you won't believe what my title is. So even though she had been told, what I find amazing about this imposter syndrome is this internal blindness we create. And I found that really interesting when I thought about my daughter. We protect ourselves by creating this internal blind, like we shut off this because we're not feeling comfortable. So we forget scenarios or we forget job titles. And it's that protection is amazing. And so we need to look out for where that imposter syndrome is showing up for us in our business. And it may be that we are turning, I remember, you spoke about persuasion as well. I remember going to someone shaking with their VAT return. It was their VAT return. They'd made the sales. I had just put the things together, but I would be shaking because I knew he would say, that's too much. What have you done wrong? And that stuck with me. It's taken a long time for me to be able to turn it around. And what I realized for me was that giving more information throughout the month, so once a month saying the VAT's looking like this, it was kind of I was building up, how do I not have to deal with that again? So when we do have that, and I know we have clients all the time and bookkeeper centers all the time, I've got this angry client, and maybe it's a case that in hindsight, we could attract different clients. And that's great to say that, Joe. But in this moment in time, I've got this really angry client. How do I deal with it? How do people deal with situations where they feel it's hostile?
Yeah, a great question, Joe. Firstly, I want to say to you, I'm a little bit traumatized by the memory of the shoebox there.
Yeah, I had some dodgy clients in the past, Nick. Really dodgy.
So anyway, so apart from that, obviously that you brought something up for me personally there. And also I love your earlier comment about values-based business. Isn't it easy to forget that we go into business because we've got an idea about how we want to do things, and then we suddenly turn that around and think, oh no, I've got to do it this way. And actually that's exactly the opposite. You run your own business because you run your own business, and it's yours. You get to decide what it looks like. So there's that. I have never found anybody who doesn't have a version of imposter syndrome. And I've had some clients. So I remember one client was the finance director of a FTSE 250 company. And I'd been working with them for about a month. And I was thinking, oh, you know what, like I've made it as a coach now, because this is the kind of client I've got. Look at me. And this person phones me up in the morning, and they're saying, Nick, like I cannot do it. like we have got a shareholders meeting this afternoon. I can't go there. I'm supposed to be presenting the annual accounts. I can't do it. Like they're going to find out I do not know what I'm talking about. And I'm saying to this person, no, hold on, you can't say that because like you're my brilliant client and you're fantastic. So you can't possibly have imposter syndrome because then, I've got my whole ego resting on who you are as a client. Anyway, so long way of saying I've never found anybody who doesn't have a version of that. And finding your own calm.
What did you do in that situation with him, Nick?
Oh, I did exactly what Joe was talking about, which was like, well, who are you? Like, what have you done? What's your purpose as well? Like, why are you the finance director? Like, what's in that for you? What's your stake in it? And then another big thing which people often overlook, which is to not think about what's going to happen and not to think about the process, but to think about the outcome you want. So like what's important for you, like after the shareholders meeting, what's really important for you? And that can just flip people straight away from like struggling being in the thing to looking back on how it's going to be when it's been successful. So outcomes are really important. But Joe asked about dealing with angry people, which I think is really difficult. Because partly it depends what type of angry they are. So if they're angry because they're frightened about something, then like dealing with their fear is the most important thing. And as a bookkeeper, I think you've often probably got the insights into like what are they afraid of. Like I'm a bit worried about my cash flow, and if I've got that much VAT going out, my cash flow might be affected, or whatever it is. But just like look at the fear. So there's that type of anger. Then there's a type of anger that just comes from habit. So in my book, some of my types of difficult people, like the scary specialist, for example. So scary specialist is the expert who, like, they're really not afraid to let you know that they're the expert, and they can often be like, if not angry, but quite close to it, just as a habit, because what they like to do is keep everybody else at a distance so that they can claim all the expert territory. So maybe they're being angry because of that. And then there are other types who they're angry because they might get found out. So another one of my types is the empire builder, and they like on the outside they look like a really confident person. They're often really charismatic. They're what you would think of as a typically charismatic leader. And on the inside, they're often really, really afraid that everybody's going to find out, oh, that's just a facade, and they lack confidence. So anger can come from lots of different places. And the thing to remember, I think, as a professional is, well, allies. So don't try and deal with that on your own. Boundaries, like if you don't want to have angry clients, then just sack them. Like you sack them, find out what your values are, as Joe was saying, and go for a different market segment. And then do the fierce kindness thing. Like, what is this person afraid of? I probably have the insights that will help ameliorate that fear for them. And I can present stuff just as you were doing, Joe, with don't do the VAT all at once, but do it stage by stage. You can deal with people's fears because you have the insights as a professional person, but don't put up with crap either. Does that make sense? I can't think if I've missed anything there, but
it's so helpful. I've absolutely loved having a conversation with you about this, Nick, and I wish we had like another hour to keep chatting. But I wonder whether you can tell us a bit, because I think people are going to want to know more, they need to learn more, and I'd love to hear more about your book as well. So can you tell people a bit about your book and how people can connect with you and find out more about what you do?
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you. So the book came about because of one like really, really shaping experience I had with a client. A friend of mine who was the HR director of a big organization phoned me up and said, we've got this person. He's just like, he's chewing through coaches, he's chewing through colleagues. Like, can you help? And I've gone, I don't know. Can I talk to some other people in the organization? And other people in the organization said, like, this person is a monster. They're an absolute monster to work with. So in the end, I said, yeah, okay, I'll have a go. And I didn't think they were monstrous at all. I thought all the things we've been talking about were going on for them. You know, they were trying to make the best of things, only really had one way of operating, afraid about a lot of stuff going wrong, and just kind of stuck in that. not really, and bewildered by it. So that kind of set me up on the path of difficult people. And I was in so many circumstances where just like this really basic stuff, like be kind, but set your boundaries, look for allies, don't do stuff on your own. So many circumstances where that was going on. I wanted to have maybe this is a negative reason for writing a book. I wanted to have something I could like slap on the desk and go, for goodness sake, just read this. so that was why I wrote it. And it took quite a while to get it published, to find a publisher. And Pearson were great because they really got the idea of so many people can on the surface seem quite difficult to get on with. Yeah, so and it seems to be doing really well. It's in and out of Amazon's top 20, if not top 10. Did quite well in the WHS charts when it came out, and we just sold the rights in Japan. So there's Japanese people. I saw something, publisher sent me something the other day. It's a bestseller inside the Arctic Circle. I don't know why. It's sort of like long dark nights. Maybe there are really difficult people in Norway.
They could be. So Nick, what's it called?
Oh yeah, and it's called The 9 Types of Difficult People. And you find it on Amazon, WHS, Waterston's carry it, and it's on Pearson website as well.
Amazing. Oh well, everyone go and have a look at that, because I want to know which difficult person I am now.
Yeah. That's the first thing everybody says to me, Zoe. Like, which type am I?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciated it. It's been an amazing conversation. Thanks everyone for listening. I guess, Nick, people can connect with you on LinkedIn as well. Is that a good place for you?
Yes, that's the best place. And the book has its own micro website as well. So if you Google the 9 Types of Difficult People, that will come up. And there's a kind of, if anybody is mad enough to buy a copy, there's a whole load of free resources that come with it. So you can download a workbook, you can download a flowchart of how it all hangs together. There's loads of videos that go with it. So there's loads of other resources as well, if you don't get sick of me just from reading the book.
Super helpful. Thank you so much, Nick, for today. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you next week for another episode of the Bookkeepers Podcast. Take care.
Terrific. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for the Bookkeepers Podcast. Why not join us in the Six Figure Bookkeepers Club at sixfigurebookkeeper.club, or visit our website sixfigurebookkeeper.com.